an international organization that is set out to provide water solutions towards a water secure world. And we do that through science. And it's a privilege for us today to have this conversation with different groups of people representing different stakeholder categories to provide some perspectives on water science to confront this current risk or future risk that is coming upon the world. So the purpose of this session is to present the rationale for a more strategic and coherent science agenda for water to support policy and practice. We've been doing quite a lot of work, but we see that globally things are changing and we have to step back a little bit to reflect on the current situation and the future scenarios and be able to think about how best to address the water risk that is coming upon the world using science. So it's an open dialogue on priorities for water system science with key constituencies that are here and that are online to be able to provide their perspectives that can help us to shape the direction of things going forward. So it's about exploring interest in partnership from various categories of people to strengthen the science base for water security. It's also an opportunity to obtain feedback on the proposal that we are putting forward about the process of transitioning into this kind of science that will help to shape the direction of things going forward. So in terms of the agenda for this afternoon, we will listen to an introductory presentation about the program, and then we'll have a panel discussion. We are privileged to have 5 people to talk to us from different perspectives and to help us having a more global and a more holistic view on the science that we're doing or we should be doing. That will be followed by question and answers, and then we will just wrap up. So it's going to be a very short session, and we appreciate your contributions. We have prepared some briefs, and I think the brief should be somewhere here. I encourage every one of you to take a look, have a copy and have a look at it. And those of you that are online, you can easily access this from the email website, www.iwmi.org. So to start with, I would like to introduce to you the Director General of International Water Management Institute, Dr. Mark Smith. He will come up to give us a brief introduction to the science for water secure world that we're talking about. Mark, please.
Thank you so much, Funke. You hear me? Okay. So as Funke said, our aim is to open a dialogue and maybe a bit of a debate on how we can make water science and innovation and how they are used fit for the 21st century water risks and the challenges that they are going to bring us. So my intention with these few slides that I'll share with you is to make the case for why our existing science base for water policy and action is coming up short of what is going to be needed as we move forward now, but also make the case that we have an opportunity now. And maybe it's a short-lived opportunity, but we have a time-limited opportunity to mobilize collectively to address this, to create a water science agenda that's future ready and that responds to urgency and to those priorities that we'll talk through. And I want to also propose that to do this, we need a coalition. We need a coalition across the policy, private sector, development, and science communities. And I'll explain why I think that's the case. And then following this, we'll hear further from the panel. Slide, please. Okay, no, that's fine. Go back one, sorry. So the framing we're using is water security, right? So water security it's an articulation of the availability and quality of water for health, livelihoods, ecosystems, and production, but also acceptable levels of risk, acceptable levels of water-related risks. And these are reflected in SDG 6. But we know there's a clear message from SDG 6, from the progress report from 2021, from last year, that we are off track. Progress is off track across all its dimensions, and that the rate of progress has to accelerate by some estimates by a factor of 4. And that's a hard thing to do. Slide, please. But now consider that at the same time as tackling that, we have to adapt to and build resilience to climate change. And so what is hard is becoming much harder. The IPCC reports that were published in August last year and in February tell an unambiguous story about water. They tell a very powerful and a really unambiguous story about water. That what is coming are more frequent and severe droughts and floods, more extreme rainfall, changing river flows, shifting monsoons, and sea level rise. Billions of people are affected. And with every degree of warming, the global water cycle speeds up more and water risks intensify. So we're living in a new era of water risks. Slide, please. So the floods and droughts that we've seen around the world in 2021 and now in 2022, we have to think of, they're just a warning. They're just a warning of what's to come. So how can we achieve a water secure world? How can we deliver SDG 6 while water risks are growing? I think of it like this. It's like trying to fill up a bucket with a hole at the bottom that's actually getting bigger and bigger as we try and fill it up. So what is clear is that the science base for water security that we inherited from the 20th century cannot meet the challenges of the 21st century. That science base relied on the assumption that the past could be a guide for future water risks. And in a changing climate, this does not hold true. And so alarm bells are ringing. Alarm bells are ringing about water science. So on the screen, there's 3 quotes. The first one came from an editorial in Nature Sustainability from last year, which said, I need to get out front to read the piece, which said that the critical piece is that water studies need to confront the reality that it may be pursuing too many publications and not enough ideas, and that this is an untenable model for the field and a potential danger to society. So that's an alarm bell. The second quote, which unfortunately you can't see on the screen, is a quote from the US National Academies of Science that says that water problems are becoming more complex, more difficult to understand, more difficult to work on, have less and less of the data that we need. It's a quote that's from a few years ago, but I think it's resonating globally now. And then the third quote is from the most recent SDG 6 progress report, and it's making an appeal for more data to help us do this. So the IPCC Working Group 2 report from February made a clear case that we're not doing nearly enough to adapt to climate change. We're not doing nearly enough in government, in business, and in finance. We don't have enough data, innovation, and action that puts the most vulnerable people first. Slide, please. So our proposal is that we need to mobilize and galvanize a science agenda for water security that fully focuses on the world as it's going to exist. We propose a Science for a Water Secure World initiative over the coming 12 months. So as Funke said, we invite you here to pick up this brief. We invite those online or those that don't want to take the brief away. You can find this on the homepage of the IWMI website at the moment. And an initiative to bring together the policy, business, development, and finance communities and the water science community to work jointly on overcoming barriers to impact from water science, online regional dialogues, and an in-person conference to identify strategies and priorities for water science from science and knowledge users, so that the water science agenda going forward is jointly owned. Slide, please. So that we can forge a coalition for water system science amongst the science community, with those that are in government and civil society and business that use science and knowledge, use water science and knowledge, and also those that can use that knowledge to catalyze scaling up of innovation. A coalition that can galvanize commitments, including at the 2023 UN Water Conference coming up in just short of a year, to ensure that water science is able to serve the priorities and the urgency of delivering water security while the climate is changing. Slide, please. So, as I said at the outset, our purpose in this small informal discussion today is to kick off that dialogue, to make put our toes initially into this dialogue on this challenge and on the proposal of a process for building that dialogue and building that coalition for water system science going through to the next year. Thank you, and over to you, Funke.
Thank you very much, Mark. A coalition, a coalition, a coalition. So it's not about one person. He has outlined the process that he wants to go through in the next couple of months, and that will allow us to capture the user perspectives, scaling perspectives, science perspectives, to be able to define a new agenda that will help us to move towards the water secure world that we're talking about. So we are privileged this afternoon to have some experts among us. They have come to share with us their perspectives. And I want to call them one after the other to come up and sit here while we listen to them. So today we have with us Dr. Natalie Doflinger, who is the Watershed Science and Stewardship Director at Danone. You're welcome, Dr. Natalie. We also have Mr. Colin Apps, who comes from the Nature Conservancy, is working there as the African Freshwater Conservation Director. Representing more or less the civil society, and Dr. Natalie from the private sector, because she's coming from the global food company in the world. We also have representative of the public sector. So we have someone coming from the Water Resources Commission of Ghana, Dr. Bernadette Ajel. She's the legal officer for the Water Resources Commission of Ghana. You're welcome, Dr. Bernadette. And last but not the least, we have someone representing the youth. We've got to get the youth perspective also in our midst. The last but one. Sorry. Yeah, no, youth, not youth, yes. Last but one. We have someone representing the youth. So we have Mamin here, Sombe. She's a graduate student pursuing the water science. So we're going to hear from her perspective why water science and what should we be addressing. Now, last but not the least, we have Julian, who is coming from FCDO. He is the Regional Climate and Environment Officer, Advisor, sorry, I beg your pardon, at FCDO. We welcome. Thank you very much, our great panelists. You are welcome. So we're going to be listening to them. They will tell us about what we want to hear is a set of different perspectives on what their priorities are for water science. They are all working in the water sector. How do they see the challenge of intensifying water risk globally? And how can science help? How do you think science should help? What should we be doing differently? And then what can be achieved working in a coalition that brings together the policy, the practice, the private sector, or the civil society organizations, and the development investors, development partners? What should we be doing differently? How do you see it going forward? So the guiding question, and I would like maybe Julian will be the first person to respond to that, is what are the major gaps you see in research and knowledge and data that is actually holding back water security that we need to be addressing, particularly from your perspective, from a development partner's perspective, how we can provide, fill these gaps to provide support for your investment programs. Thank you.
projects to see.
Madasepi Yofunke. From my side, just to give you a very brief background, I'm the Regional Climate Change and Natural Resources Advisor with the UK government, our Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. Prior to joining that, I worked for 12 years for the Environmental Protection Agency in the UK on water management issues. So I can talk a bit from the international perspective and a little bit from the domestic UK perspective. In general terms, very much welcome this dialogue. This is really needed. I mean, what I've seen in my career is that the water science that we do needs to have particular elements. Firstly, it needs to be fit for purpose. In that, it needs to understand what the risks, what the challenges being faced by policymakers are. So that the form of the science you do, the tools that you use, should follow the function of the needs of water policy colleagues and climate change colleagues. And the way to do that, I think, and which is a real gap sometimes in research, is not to co-design projects. Basically go in early from the outset, go and talk to the water practitioners, talk to people in government, not just government, but government, industry, elsewhere, find out what their needs are, co-design projects, firstly. I'll touch then very briefly on climate change. And for me, this is sort of my background and area of expertise. And I think they're clearly in water management, climate change, the climate change angle sits within all parts of the process of water management, whether that's water quality management, water resources management, flood risk management. Clearly, it cuts across everything. But in terms of where I would say the real focus needs to be, I'd say three things. I mean, firstly, really important is in the monitoring. And the monitoring side, if you don't have a good time series of monitoring, a good monitoring network, you can't tell what the climate impacts are. We know that climate change impacts are uncertain. We know rainfall patterns are going to change, but we don't even know in some models which direction. You need to be modeling what's happening hydrologically there. The second is researching what the changed pressures on the water environment will be because of climate change. So are you going to have increased risk of flooding? Are you going to have increased risk of E. coli contamination of your water bodies, etc.? But understand, what do those climate projections you have mean for the water world? And then the third one is design of the solutions. So when you're designing solutions, what are you doing about climate change projections in that? What is your headroom if you're designing a reservoir? What is the energy need for your wastewater treatment works, for example? So what is the solution? So three things: monitoring, pressure, solutions. And then finally, I think where we've got a gap, and this is a really useful dialogue for, is you need to be shouting more loudly. From my perspective, in COP26, the last year UK hosting the climate change conference, water didn't feature as strongly as it should have done. We all have a job to do to explain that climate change largely is about water, and that water is going to be the solution to climate change. That message hasn't got through yet. To do that, very important is to try and go with the flow of where your senior policymakers, particularly your ministers, have an interest. And this is maybe something I shouldn't say, but ministers can get tied up in particular issues. You need to relate to them. If, for example, if they're very interested in security, you need to talk in security terms. If they're very interested in nature, you need to provide water solutions that link to nature. So do understand what the politics of the moment is, and you will get much further in the impact of your science. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much. That was really very, very good and very clear. 4 things that you have said about engaging with the policymakers, understanding their needs and designing to meet their needs, and thinking about projection and what the impact of the projections will be. And then as well as having appropriate equipment and mechanism for monitoring and using the data to inform the design of whatever intervention we want to embark on. That's really very useful. Thank you very much. Now you talked about the public sector, and I would like to go straight to the public sector representative here, Dr. Bernadette Ajil. You're coming from the Water Resources Commission, Ghana, and you actually accompany maybe the minister here providing technical support. So from your perspective, what should water science community do or needs to do better to help policy-making processes?
Well, thank you very much. So as someone engaged in policy making and law making, we've realized that when policies and laws are done in a vacuum, implementation becomes very problematic. And so Ghana is a member of the International Hydrological Program. And at our local level, we have a committee. And interestingly, for adopting the international agenda for water governance, we looked at 5 priority areas. The first was on science, research, and innovation. And then the 5th was on water governance based on science for mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. Meaning that really the realization that science and governance are linked has been made. So the way forward is to develop toolkits that find a way of integrating the science setting and governance so that they don't stand aside. And I see it in 2 ways, that research should be influenced by what is needed for governance, okay? And then governance should have a base of research, in the sense that, for example, if you want to come out with laws on buffer zones, protection, you should find out which areas we are talking about, what are the uses. And these are database, these are science-related activities. So you find out the uses so that when you are coming out with regulation, you are able to tailor your regulation to fit the uses. Otherwise, you end up with laws that are really hanging in the air and becomes very difficult to implement. So the IHP program and others also have realized that education is also key. And so education, as in science education in water, starting from the basic level through to secondary, and then you build it up into academia. More recently also, as government institutions, we are getting into collaborations with universities where we sign memorandum of understanding, and then they want us to tease out what our needs are for governance, and then they do the science research on it to help us. So these are some of the things that at our national level we are doing to narrow the interface between science and governance so that we go forward better. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very, very useful. We've said when policy making is done in a vacuum, implementation becomes problematic. I hear you well. And you also talked about the need for education. So it's not just about science and innovation, but also education, training, good curriculum. And that will take me to Mamin, who is doing a graduate studies in water science. And can you tell us what's your motivation and what should we be doing differently from your experience? What do you think are the gaps now that we need to begin to fill when we are bringing in education in water and water science? I want to help young people to develop their capacity in that field. En français, pas de problème. She wants to speak in French.
Ok, merci beaucoup. Pour ma part, je trouve qu'on parle beaucoup de climate change, de changement climatique, mais on parle moins du changement de la couverture terrestre et de la végétation, alors que c'est une partie intégrante du changement climatique qui a aussi son impact sur la ressource en eau. Le problème majeur est qu'on se spécifie uniquement sur le changement climatique et pas encore sur le changement de la couverture terrestre. Donc, on a besoin de plus d'informations sur le changement climatique et sur la couverture terrestre. Actuellement, comme vous l'avez dit, il y a beaucoup d'informations sur le changement climatique et moins sur la couverture terrestre. Alors que pour faire une étude sur la couverture terrestre, il nous faut beaucoup de moyens, mais aussi beaucoup de sécurité, surtout au milieu de l'Afrique centrale. Dans le cas de ma thèse, normalement, je devais aller au Mali pour faire du field work. Mais malheureusement, je n'ai pas pu le faire à cause des raisons sécuritaires. Donc, ceci est aussi un impact qui constitue un gap pour la recherche ici en Afrique.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So you are saying that it's not just about water. We have to think about climate change. We also have to look at land use.
En fait, le changement climatique et land use ont des impacts sur la disponibilité de l'eau. Il y a beaucoup de rapports qui disent que la pluviométrie va diminuer. Mais il y a des études qui ont montré que bien que la pluviométrie a diminué, les débits ont augmenté. Du fait qu'il y a de la déforestation, de ce fait, il y a une augmentation du ruissellement qui fait qu'il y a un débit d'eau important qui permet de satisfaire la production d'énergie, d'irrigation, ce genre de choses. Donc, ça spécifié seulement sur le changement climatique pour faire des projections pour dire que il y aura moins de pluviométrie et que moins de débit au niveau des cours d'eau, ça va un peu fausser les projections.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so for those that didn't hear what she said, she's trying to buttress the fact that we need to expand when we're looking at water science. We need to look at it inclusive of climate change scenarios and land use management. So it's not just about water, but it's also about land. So because water is in the land anyway, so it's all inclusive when we're looking at curriculum development. So we heard about curriculum development on science around governance, linking science to research science to governance issues. But also when we're doing their science, the research, we need to look at land use changes along water changes and all that. Thank you very much. I will go to Dr. Natalia. I know that Danone is a leading global food company, and you're very much concerned about sustainability, conservation, providing good food and beverage, healthy for people. So what's your perspective about how water science can inform the steps that you take? What are the gaps? What are the knowledge gaps that we need to provide to support the steps that you take?
Yes, thank you. As a scientist working at Danone as background of hydrogeology and working on water stewardship, on our we identified some watersheds at risk, considering the climate change, but also the global change, and we need to associate both of them. We defined some priority actions, and we are convinced that we need to carry out some collective actions. So I will say that when we do this, working at the watershed level, we are facing different type of gaps. In some places, data about water, surface water, or even groundwater is even stronger, are not there. So we need to relay, and it's difficult still to relay to some global product to identify what is the variation of groundwater, for example. I mean, the remote sensing is not there at the right scale when we are there at the local scale. And it's the same for the, let's say, for the hydroclimatic products. There is quite good development, but it's still necessary to rely on some ground monitoring data. And so there is a need to work on the downscaling and the accuracy on this type of product. And finally, the second gap, I will say, it's how to have the the human sciences and the physical sciences defining the right collective actions together, and what are the scientific issue, because I mean there's still gaps between surface, groundwater users, and all the governance. And sometimes, I mean, when we implement water stewardship, it takes quite a long time, because there is how to accompany the transition, the changes And we need to rely on scientists on that, and this is very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You emphasize the aspect of watershed protection, watershed focus, not just doing it in isolation, but looking at it at the watershed level. That would take me to nature conservancy, because that is exactly similar to what you do. So what can you say are the priorities for water science and innovation that will help you or help the global community to manage future water risk? What should water science focus on?
Yeah, thank you so much. And my background is eco-hydrology. I've been working for the Nature Conservancy about a decade in the Eastern United States and about a decade in Africa. And the challenges are similar. And I was hoping it was going to be a controversial statement to say, let's do less publications, but Mark beat me to it. I think to the extent we can start measuring ourselves as scientists on problems either we've solved or more likely facilitated a process in which it can be solved over time is really important. And so this is a really valuable effort to try to get there. From my perspective, whether you're in the United States or Africa, two of the core questions are what's going on in terms of my water availability seasonally. So, flows in most river systems. And where does my water come from, and what are the land use factors and other factors that are affecting that? And, I think those two questions generally can't be answered very well with a publication. It's generally, we need to get more stream gauging in place. We need to be okay with a lack of accuracy associated with that, be using pressure transducers, using other ways in which we are able to have data that's not maybe fully accurate, but gives us an understanding of what the bounds of allocation are and protection. And then, working both in the United States and Africa, it is remarkable, whether it's a large company or a water utility, how often there is a lack of ability to map and understand what the watershed is upstream of the source water area or the catchment upstream of an intake. And what are the land use patterns and changes upstream? And then, again, hard to publish on, but really important work that the science community can do. And it can integrate both of those through modeling. But I think as a science community, we tend to move towards the most sophisticated models, questions that are interesting with regards to future climate change scenarios. But really what we generally need is an inaccurate model that can be run on the web through the cloud that helps define the bounds of sustainability in terms of meeting water allocation needs for humans and protection of environmental flows, for example, for the ecosystem. So I think our challenge is, how do we catalyze that? And everyone here has talked about field data collection at a range of scales and levels of accuracy. How do we catalyze an understanding of our source catchments, particularly in water stressed areas? And how do we understand, using a modeling framework, but at least a simple modeling framework, how do we kind of make good decisions about water allocation, water use, and land use at a macro scale to really help the end users, which are generally governments at multiple scales and other major water users like corporates. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Colleen. It's very, very interesting, because most of the things you are saying also like what we've heard from other people, and also what we have been doing. But what I hear you saying is that we should do it differently. It has to be targeted to the user's need. There has to be less of publication. And if there's publication at all, it has to be relevant publication that somebody will use, that will help them to be able to make the appropriate decision that they need to make. Thank you very much. And you talked about the fact that, well, geography does not matter. Water is water everywhere. Whether it's in the US or it's in South Africa, water is water. And we have to look at that hydrological unit to see how to manage it well. Thank you very much. Let me give opportunity to the audience, or maybe online. your listeners, if there's any question online that we can respond to, or anyone has anything to contribute, just one, we don't have much time. Anybody? Yeah, Peter.
I think I'm just going to reinforce a couple of points there, but thank you all for your interventions. Very good in the short space of time you had. I think on this, I can't remember who was talking about the social science and the hard sciences and the mixture there. And definitely it's the behavior change piece of that, how we, when you're saying about the stewardship of the water resources, they usually comes back to the farmers or other land managers and so forth. And this is a piece that to me is still, we've done work in, but it's a big gap is how do you actually do this? Even not calling it behavior change, because this is actually a politically loaded term when you start talking to politicians. The other piece on this is on the monitoring. We've got to really think very hard about the sustainability of the monitoring networks, because we've gone through this cycle a number of times. How do we get that we can actually, so it's remote sensing, and then the politics of data. There's a lot of data out there. A vast majority of it in the private sector, in the public sector and so forth, is not accessible. So how do you, some of it's just that it's not published, but a lot of times, like in the Midwest of the United States, it's actually in the hands of the local water management groups, and that's controlled by farmers, and they don't want to release that because they've been stung by that in the past.
Yeah. Okay.
My name is Kinsley Ovintra. I'm coming from Ghana. And I would like to just ask about the water governance issues as raised. Normally, when we are trying to relate the science to governance issues, occasionally, some disagree. They have their own reasons why they disagree. For example, in the earlier stages of talking about climate change and CFCs, many people did not want us to talk about old fridges being used and being resold. But sometimes we also find that when you bring in a bit of the traditions and the taboos, it tends to work. So in the water governance issues, marrying it with the sciences, how do we bring in the traditional modes that worked in the past to support the science and then support sustainability too?
Okay, so there are just two. Okay, we'll take the last one and then we will allow the panel to respond.
Yes, thank you for very interesting presentation. My name is Simon Thuo. I work for various agencies and in different countries in Africa. My question is, maybe I still sense that there's still a lot of hedging. It's as if we don't know enough to act. And yet, as you saw from Mark's presentation, 6 giraffes dead for the first time in history on, and the northern tip of Kenya because of a very critical drought. So there is an acute problem now, but I still sense we need more science, we need more stream flow, we need this and that. How is it that you can have good science, but you can have also inspiration to act, or at least information to act? Because in all the countries that I work, the most underfunded part of the water sector is the one that collects data, the water resources monitoring and so on. It's because they can't show impact from what they do. The others, can at least show that they can have interventions that are useful. So 1, citizen science. 2, do we have to wait for scientists? Shouldn't this be more socialized? And how can we get more information to kids in school, to students everywhere, to farmers in communities, rather than just waiting for the scientists to produce their publications, which nobody knows when they're never.
Okay, thank you very much. That will be all. So we can have some response from you.
I think a quick response to the last comment, in the sense that you need the science because empirical data always guides. You need the social science, the physical science. It gives you a base and reality of where you are going, because it's factual. Even when there's modeling, it's also based on a system that would work. And so it's often important to look in that area to guide policy and practice. The question about traditional knowledge systems and how we bring it into governance, I think that's so key. In many plural legal systems, especially in Africa, where our customary laws were transplanted with the imported laws, you find that there's a parallel of customary laws working at the local level and then the state laws. But you also find that these customary laws are not completely lost. What they seek to do, or their means of working, is to put out some prohibitions based with superstition, which people want to go by. What modern governance can do is to pick some of those prohibitions and then make it into a legal framework. The superstition may not work, but at least when you know that the prohibitions were there for a purpose, you tailor it into your more modern governance systems and then it works. I was also proposing that we have traditional rulers who command a lot of moral respect in their communities. And most of our governance systems do not make them part of implementation, only advisory bodies. And so that is something I'm actually driving when it comes to lawmaking, that we look at the local level, bringing in traditional authorities to be part of the implementation, empowering them so that we make progress in that sense. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anyone of you want to respond to the comments from Peter and the last speaker?
Yeah,
Yes.
great. 3 points to make. Firstly, on monitoring and data, I completely agree. The data we've got is not being used well enough. Just to give you an example, last week I was in Uganda, Ginger at the source of the Nile, talking with ESCOM, who run the dams, series of 4 dams, hydroelectric power. They share their flow data with every dam downstream of them, but then it stops at the border. So they're not sharing, the data just shared between themselves, running their hydroelectric powers. They're not sharing that beyond, which is completely a waste in my mind. Secondly, just on your point, big social science, absolutely. The big decisions, big political decisions that I have seen made have not been based on science, particularly physical science. They've been based on emotion, and then the science comes in later when we try and explain what to do. So just in my whole career, very few high-level decisions being made on the basis of physical science, including on climate change, I have to say. And then the last one, this is a challenge to everyone, basically. And this is about where we invest our money. For me, I'm a public servant. I use public money to invest in particular areas of development, including water science. Now, the question is, does what you're doing provide the best value for money? And I've seen lots of examples where the sexy stuff, for example, a new supercomputer to do meteorological models, which is very expensive, is taking priority over the really practical stuff that we need to do to actually improve the world. And I kind of think that I don't know what the solution is, but it's a challenge to you guys. Every day when you're putting in a proposal, do you think, is this providing value for money? Because that's the bottom line, is that's what we need to be doing.
Thank you very much. Research that provides value for money and very relevant to the user. Okay, can I have the last word from Dr. Natali? Anything you want to add to this?
Yeah, maybe a last word about the importance to rely at addressing the questions at different scale, and also to build with the people who are part of the solution. And yeah, one thing that we see is there is different platforms where you can exchange about the results or the outcomes of some different projects. It's project driven, but sometimes it is quite done in silo. The scientists are disseminated to policymakers or the public sector and the private sector in the other side, and so on. And so definitely maybe there is, yes, the how to address at the right scale and to network the exchange of the solutions and that is used at the watershed level, and that could be also source or data or information to build science on and to address and to go faster all together.
Thank you very much. Can you pass it on to Colin for the last word? Anything from you?
Yeah, I mean, not too much to add. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, I think that the challenge of, I mean, I think this this would be a nice initiative to try to take on the challenge of data that we can't access, right? Because you know that the speakers are doing a great job and questioners describing this, and you know it's such a wide range from academic data we can't reach, industry data we can't reach, government data that you have to pay for, and NGO data that just gets lost in the computer somewhere. So figuring out how we get both a physical database system that we can use together, and then an incentive system, all the more importantly, is really important. And then, yeah, coupling that with social information, traditional information, values information that can inform management. I do think that very few high-level decisions are made based on science, but even if you're going to, even if you're building a hydropower dam, you've got to be able to model what your flows are, and a water supply dam. So everyone needs the data, whether you're trying to do a development project or a protection project. And I think that would be a really good thing for this initiative to try to tackle.
Okay, thank you very much. Before I call, yeah, you want to say something again? Okay. I know you are collecting data now in the course of your graduate program. You're going from Benin to Mali to Senegal, collecting data. Do you foresee that your data will be very relevant to the government of your country or any of these countries?
Le problème majeur, c'est que avec le problème majeur, c'est que je suis pas allée dans beaucoup d'endroits pour collecter des données qui n'existent pas en fait. Donc, finalement, j'ai été obligée d'utiliser des données, Reanalyze, Watch AR5 and Ship Data pour pouvoir faire ma modélisation hydraulique et ma modélisation avec la lanière de courbe. Et même pour pouvoir utiliser ces données, il faut les au moins comparer avec les données observées pour pouvoir corriger les différents gaps. Mais il n'y a pas suffisamment de données observées même pour pouvoir faire la comparaison. Donc, c'est un véritable problème qu'il faut résoudre pour avoir plus de précision dans les futures recherches.
Thank you very much. I will now call on Richard to help us kind of summarize the findings of this conversation.
So you have challenged us. You have said we've got to produce the right data at the right scale for the right purpose, which is decision making. And what we see at the moment is we see fantastic publications with ever increasingly accurate outputs, but you don't necessarily want accuracy. You want timeliness and the right scale, and you will put up with a bit of less decimal points, but understanding the breakpoints, but also understanding the trajectories of whether it's a basin you're going to invest in a new food and beverage business, or to protect an ecosystem which has to be part of that. So we can see that as scientists, we have to come up with better data. And we know that what we're seeing, the advances in artificial intelligence, new different data sources, we have to be smarter and link that to the field data and be able to do that. And we also need to break down those silos. What we've heard a lot about is just like biophysical data. You hydrologists are really good, but that's actually not where the decisions are having to be made. We need to understand political science. We need to know economic and social science, because they often dictate the decisions, not how much meter cube per second is flowing down a river. And what we also know, and it's something that we see all the time, is the growing importance of governance. How much water is available, but who has the right to it? Who is allocated? What does the water law say about that? There's so little research in that space. We know that IWMI is doing some work in Southern Africa on making the national water law in South Africa, which is, has always been taken as one of the gold standards of 1998. But we're now having to adjust that, because actually it's not a fixed amount we need. We need a percentage amount, because the differences between a dry year and a flood year and a normal year and a year when the rains start later than normal, we need to have percentages, because there just isn't enough water to go around. So we can see governance is critically important. And maybe the other area I'm hearing is that your scientists have to stop thinking in your silos And yes, you might be in the Department of Water Engineering or the Department of Agriculture or the Department of Ecosystems, but get out there and talk to the people in the next department. Because whether it's land use and land use change, or whether it's thinking beyond that, it's that watershed level, it's that systems level. And systems don't have nice academic boundaries. So you scientists have to step outside. And yes, it's challenging because it goes against your thinking, but this new generation of scientists coming through are going to be helping us lead that way. So do I pass? So thank you very much. I am going to pass back to Mark because this is his wonderful initiative to close out.
Thank you, Rachel. I'll just add 2 sentences. And that's all of this. This has been excellent in helping us think through where it is that we need to go. But as we look at that, we need to have one eye on March 2023, when there'll be the UN Water Conference, because we need to make sure that science is part of that discussion, and that what comes out of that helps to shape this agenda in a way that's going to make the work that we've all been talking about relevant and impactful, and therefore part of the dialogue that goes forward from after the conference. Otherwise, if we don't manage that, otherwise we just won't be part of the conversation, and that will mean all of the things that we've been talking about in terms of better policy, better governance, better integrated data, and better integrated issues. We won't move forward. So that's kind of the intent that's behind putting in front of you the idea of this initiative, is to make sure that we can come together, have the dialogue and discussion we need, so that out of that process that's going to be built over the coming year comes ensures that science and scientists and the communities of scientists and the communities that we work with in the wider circles are part of that process going forward. So thank you all very much. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you for being responsive to my pestering emails over the last several days. And thank you to Funke and Rachel and all of you for participating. Thank you.